My father looked me dead in the eye at his retirement gala and whispered that I was only invited out of pity. He and my two stepbrothers laughed, treating me like an embarrassing shadow in my own worn clothes, completely blind to the reality that my silent absence over the past year wasn't due to failure. I had spent that time building a private infrastructure acquisition firm that was quietly absorbing their industry. I didn't make a scene. I just smiled, took my coat, and walked out into the rain. They thought they had successfully cast me out of the family legacy, completely unaware that a massive financial fuse had already been lit. 5 days later, everything hit them all at once. If you want to see how a father's cruel insult turned into the exact moment he lost his entire life's work, make sure to stay tuned until the very end. My name is Gemma. In the cold, calculated hierarchy of my family, human value was always determined by the size of your portfolio and the loudness of your boast. My father, Garrick, was a titan in the commercial shipping industry, a man who viewed empathy as a fatal flaw and treated his own children like business investments. When my mother passed away, he married into a corporate family, bringing my two stepbrothers, Lyndon and Cale, into our home. They were identical copies of Garrick, sharp-suited, arrogant, and entirely devoid of warmth. I was the quiet anomaly, a daughter who walked away from the family firm to study venture asset management on my own terms. To them, my preference for quiet, strategic planning was a clear sign of weakness. They assumed I was barely keeping my head above water, an embarrassing shadow to be hidden away from their elite social circles. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere of returning to my hometown for my father's luxury retirement gala was exactly what I expected. The grand ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers and expensive champagne, a monument to Garrick's lifelong greed. As I walked through the doors in a simple, dark blazer, the judgmental whispers shifted into high gear. Lyndon and Cale immediately looked past me, their eyes filled with a familiar, mocking condescension. I tolerated their cold stares, staying perfectly calm and letting them believe exactly what they wanted to believe about my silent absence. The psychological catalyst of that entire evening occurred near the grand ballroom balcony, away from the prying eyes of the press. My father, Garrick, cornered me near the marble railing, his face a mask of cold, unyielding disappointment. He didn't offer a greeting or ask about my life. Instead, he leaned in close, his voice a harsh, cutting whisper. "You should know, Gemma, that you were only invited tonight out of sheer pity. We needed to keep up appearances for the board, but your presence here is an embarrassment to everything I've built." Before I could even respond, Lyndon and Cale stepped up beside him, their expressions twisting into synchronized arrogant smirks as they looked down at my simple attire. Lyndon adjusted his diamond cufflinks, swirling his vintage scotch with a patronizing chuckle. "Dad's right, Gemma. Look around you. This is a room full of real earners, people who actually move the global economy. You're just a low-level asset manager playing with pennies while we control the entire regional supply chain." Cale nodded in agreement, adding a passive-aggressive comment about how they had just finalized a massive, high-risk expansion that would double their shipping fleet, cementing their absolute dominance over the industry. I felt the sting of their cruelty, a deep-seated malice designed to break my spirit in front of their peers. But I didn't flinch, I didn't argue, and I didn't let a single emotion show on my face. Instead, a wave of absolute, freezing clarity washed over me. I looked at the three of them, quietly holding a massive, multi-million-dollar secret close to my chest, and simply walked away into the dark. What my father and stepbrothers completely failed to realize was that while they were busy celebrating their superficial dominance, I had spent the last 18 months silently engineering their downfall. Through my private equity firm, I had been monitoring their corporate health with surgical precision. Garrick's beloved shipping corporation was a hollow shell, rotting from the inside out due to reckless, high-interest expansions and hidden operational liabilities that Lyndon and Cale had desperately tried to conceal from the board. They thought their aggressive fleet expansion was a sign of absolute strength, but it was actually a massive, desperate gamble funded by predatory institutional loans. Working quietly under an anonymous corporate umbrella, my firm began systematically buying up their primary institutional debt notes whenever their creditors grew nervous. We didn't stop there. I targeted their back-end infrastructure, quietly purchasing the master leases for the very supply routes and port facilities their cargo vessels relied on to operate. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so convinced that the daughter they cast aside was playing with pennies, that they never bothered to check who actually owned the ground beneath their feet. While they were busy drinking expensive champagne and calling me a failure, I was quietly absorbing their entire ecosystem. By the night of that retirement gala, I didn't just hold a few shares. I held the absolute financial keys to their entire corporate survival, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trap shut. The precise, tactical timeline of their undoing began the very next morning. The moment I left that suffocating ballroom, I didn't shed a single tear. Instead, I called my senior legal team and authorized the immediate activation of our acquisition protocols. The countdown had officially begun. For the first 4 days, a calculated, absolute silence settled over the entire industry. My father and stepbrothers returned to their executive offices, completely unaware that a financial fuse had been lit beneath their desks. Day 1 was spent verifying the final transfer of their master port leases into my holding company's private registry. Day 2, we quietly notified their primary banking consortium that we now held 100% of their defaulted corporate debt notes. By day 3 and 4, our analysts were aligning the final enforcement notices, ensuring every single legal vulnerability was locked tight from the inside. Before we move on to the 5th day, when their entire empire completely shattered all at once, I want to ask you a quick question. How do you handle family members who constantly underestimate your intelligence or belittle your hard work? Do you confront them immediately, or do you execute your plans in total silence until success speaks for itself? Let me know your strategies in the comments below. As the sun began to rise on the 5th morning, I sat calmly in my office, watching the clock tick toward 9 a.m., knowing that my family's entire world was about to collide with reality. On the 5th morning, the entire illusion of my family's empire completely shattered in a matter of minutes. At exactly 9 o'clock, my firm authorized the immediate enforcement of our newly acquired legal rights, and everything hit them all at once. Inside their corporate headquarters, the morning routine descended into absolute, unadulterated chaos. First, the primary banking consortium executed our enforcement order, instantly freezing every single corporate checking account, payroll line, and line of credit tied to the family business. Before Garrick could even process the warning alerts flashing red on his monitor, his desk phone began ringing off the hook. It was the port authorities at their primary shipping hub. Because my holding company had officially terminated their defaulted back-end supply route leases at midnight, 3 massive cargo vessels loaded with millions of dollars in perishable freight were abruptly blocked from docking, completely halting their entire regional supply chain. Lyndon and Cale frantically sprinted into their father's office, their tailored jackets disheveled and their faces completely pale with terror. Garrick's hands shook violently as he received an emergency text message from the board of directors, stating that an anonymous institutional creditor had just declared them in total technical default, giving them exactly 1 hour to meet face-to-face or face immediate, involuntary liquidation. They were completely paralyzed, trapped inside a financial prison without a single clue as to who had turned the key, frantically screaming at their secretaries to track down the mysterious owner of the holding company. Garrick, Lyndon, and Cale rushed into their executive boardroom, their breathing heavy and their faces pale with a desperation they had never experienced in their entire lives. They expected to meet a ruthless, faceless corporate raider, a titan of industry who had quietly stripped them of their power. Instead, as the heavy mahogany doors swung open, the 3 men froze in absolute, paralyzed silence. I was sitting calmly at the head of the polished conference table, flanked by 4 senior corporate defense partners and a mountain of ironclad legal documentation. I didn't say a word. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea and watched as their minds completely failed to process the reality standing right in front of them. Gemma. Garrick finally choked out, his voice cracking as he looked at the legal briefs bearing my private holding company's official seal. I leaned forward, sliding the default enforcement notices across the table. "You told me I was only invited out of pity," I said smoothly, my voice carrying a freezing clarity that echoed through the silent room. "But the reality is, I now control your debt notes, your port leases, and your shipping routes. The daughter you cast aside as an embarrassing failure completely owns your financial destiny." Lyndon dropped his briefcase, and Kale sank into a chair, utterly defeated as my legal team laid out the unyielding reality. They could sign over total operational control immediately, or face total bankruptcy. The following week, my legal team finalized the total restructuring of the shipping corporation, completely stripping Garrick, Lyndon, and Kale of their executive titles and removing them permanently from the board. I didn't act out of malice. I simply executed a standard corporate cleanup, replacing their reckless arrogance with efficient, transparent asset management. My father and stepbrothers were forced to surrender their high-end luxury estates and vehicle fleets just to satisfy their remaining personal liabilities, learning the hard way that true power is never measured by a loud mouth or a patronizing smile. I returned to my quiet coastal headquarters, expanding my venture firm and continuing to build my legacy entirely on my own terms, surrounded by people who respect silent dedication over superficial status. If this journey proved to you that executing your plans in total silence is always the ultimate victory over those who underestimate you, please subscribe to the channel, click that like button, and comment the city you are watching from so I can see exactly how far Gemma's story has traveled across the world.